London did not wake to a bang, but to the dry, almost clandestine rustle of paper defying the foul wind off the Thames. It was 6 in the morning, and the city presented itself as a sick organism coughing up soot beneath a pewter sky, too heavy to let even a glimmer of hope filter through. Thomas walked close to the walls of Fleet Street, his chin buried in the collar of a coat that still reeked of the sharp, acidic ink from the night before. Each step he took on the damp cobbles felt like a secret being crushed underfoot. He stopped at the corner of an alley that exhaled a cloying blend of stale fish, coal, and urine, watching a group of dock workers gathered around a customs post. A short man, with knotted hands and skin like boiled leather, held the pamphlet between his fingers. The paper was cheap, grayish, but the words printed upon it carried the surgical precision of a well-honed bayonet. "Who wrote this stuff? A madman or an angel?" asked a fisherman, spitting a dark stream of tobacco that splashed into an oily puddle. "Or someone who has finally realized that angels don't know how to run a press and that madmen are the only ones who tell the truth without charging for the trouble," Thomas replied under his breath, passing them without slowing, savoring the suspicious glance they threw at his back. A little further on, where the fog grew thick enough to be chewed, Thomas crossed paths with Barnaby. He was an old comrade, a man with whom Thomas had shared mud and lice in the colonies, and who now served in the city watch, wearing a coat that always seemed too tight for his conscience. Barnaby was busy tearing a sheet from a lamppost with a fervor that betrayed a certain unease. "Thomas, what the devil are you doing out at this hour?" said Barnaby, crumpling the sheet into an unshapeless ball. "You ought to be in some club in Piccadilly discussing the poor quality of port or dying of boredom like all second sons of nobility who don't know what to do with themselves." "Boredom is a luxury that requires too much spirit, Barnaby, and I fear I spent mine between the monsoons and your tales of imaginary conquests in Calcutta," Thomas replied, stopping to look at the ruined scrap of paper. "I see you found some interesting reading material. Needed it to polish your boots, or are you finally trying to learn the alphabet to impress the baker's daughter?" Barnaby grunted, tossing the ball of paper into the mud. "It's subversive rubbish. The Duke has issued clear orders. Clean every corner. Says these words are like fleas. They carry plague and make people scratch in all the wrong places. James isn't a man who likes itching, as you well know." "James? Oh, I wasn't aware our dear Duke had developed such epidermal sensitivity. I thought his skin had grown thick enough between a scholarship and a political promotion to withstand a little cheap ink. But perhaps the truth burns more than gunpowder when it hits you full in the face, wouldn't you say? Tell me, Barnaby, do they pay you more to censor reality or to pretend you don't understand what you read?" "They pay me not to end up in the stocks, which is something you seem to desire with almost religious fervor," Barnaby shot back, lowering his voice and glancing around. "Stop this, Thomas. James may be your friend, but he's still the Duke. If you carry on like this, he won't be able to protect you forever. You can't keep sticking your fingers into the gears of the empire and then complain when you lose a hand." "My hands are already dirty, my friend. That's the advantage of not having titles to polish every morning," Thomas replied, giving a pat to his companion's armored shoulder. "And as for James, do tell him that if my papers cause him irritation, I can recommend an excellent apothecary in Chelsea. Or, more simply, he might stop providing such excellent material for my articles. It would save us both a great deal of time." Thomas resumed his march. As he turned towards the heart of the city, he noticed that the shop boys were not merely cleaning the streets, they were passing the pamphlets hand to hand, slipping them into their aprons with the same care one reserves for a sacred fetish. He could feel the static electricity in the air, that premonitory hum that precedes a summer storm or a street uprising. He had torn the veil. For years, London had fed on saccharine official bulletins and patriotic lies packaged in Whitehall. But that morning, the city was looking the empire straight in the eye, and it did not like what it saw reflected in the pupils of power. He passed a fine carriage halted in the morning traffic of hay carts. Inside, a young dandy glared at him through a monocle. Thomas tipped his hat, a gesture so steeped in sarcasm that the other man looked away, offended by such proletarian familiarity. "Enjoy your silk while you can, lad," Thomas thought, feeling the weight of the documents in his satchel against his hip. Because when lead turns into words, there's no escort or title that can stop the rain. His path now led him towards the printing district, where the city's sulfurous stench gave way to the more honest, biting smell of turpentine and linseed oil. The battle was no longer confined to his nightmares or the jungles of Burma. Now it had an address, a rhythm, and above all, an audience that had just begun to hunger for the truth. And Thomas, with the irony of a man who has nothing left to lose but his integrity, was ready to serve the meal. By noon, Thomas understood that James had no need for a bayonet or a firing squad to kill a man. For the Duke, silence was enough. A curtain of frost that fell over every conversation the moment Thomas made his entrance. It was not a swift death. It was a social evaporation. He stepped into the George, an inn that usually thrummed with the chaos of journalists and traders from Fleet Street. The moment he crossed the threshold, the clatter of tankards and laughter died, replaced by a feverish whisper that dissolved into a vacuum. Thomas felt the stairs on the back of his neck like cold pins. "A pint of your finest ale, John, and try not to lace it with too much bile. I find my soul bitter enough today," said Thomas, sliding a coin across the worn oak counter. John, the landlord, a man whose belly was the finest advertisement for his own stock, did not look at the coin. He wiped the same patch of counter with a rag that had seen better days, perhaps under the reign of George III. "We don't serve those who bring the plague into the house, Thomas. Not here, not anywhere," John replied, without raising his eyes. "The plague? I checked myself in the mirror this morning and saw no buboes, John. Unless you mean the truth. In that case, be careful. They say it's far more contagious than syphilis and decidedly harder to cure with mercury." "The Duke has been clear," the landlord went on, his voice reduced to a hiss. "Anyone who offers you a chair will be offering their own back to the state's whip, and I value my skin more than I value your brilliant conversation or your leather bag full of trouble." "Understandable. Your skin is certainly more plentiful than your spine, John. Tell me, what does loyalty to James cost today? A renewed license to sell this horse piss you call beer, or merely the privilege of breathing without asking Whitehall for permission?" Thomas took back his coin and left, trailing behind him a silence that reeked of cowardice. He knew John was not a bad man, only one who understood the weight of a ducal shadow. The sun was a pale, useless disk over the city when Thomas reached his lodgings. He was not surprised to find his belongings on the pavement, piled in the mud with a haste that bordered on panic. His military trunk, scarred by travel, lay beside a stack of books on botany and a pair of boots in need of care. "Was there a miscalculation in the rent, Higgins?" Thomas called up towards the first-floor window, where lace curtains stirred faintly. Mrs. Higgins, a widow whose only apparent joy in life was the disapproval of others, leaned out just enough to be heard. "Be off with you, Thomas. Men in black frock coats came here an hour ago. They didn't shout, didn't break anything. They simply whispered that if you stay another night, the house will be requisitioned for administrative necessity. They say you're a ghost, and I want no specters under my roof, least of all policemen at my door." "A ghost? That's an interesting update to my civil status," Thomas laughed, hoisting his trunk. "At least assure me you won't charge a penalty for lack of notice, or has the Duke's bureaucracy devised a tax on apparitions as well? Just go!" The window slammed shut. Thomas stood alone on the pavement. It was noon, and he no longer had a place to sleep, a place to drink, or a friend who dared acknowledge him. James was dismantling him piece by piece, with the precision of a watchmaker removing superfluous gears. It was a refined strategy, not to turn him into a martyr, but into a pariah. "You're making things very simple for me, James," Thomas murmured, slinging the trunk over his shoulder. He felt the leather press against the scar on his shoulder, a memory of a battle far more honest than this one. When a man has nothing left to lose, he stops caring where he treads, and I am about to walk into your perfect drawing room with boots very, very dirty. He set off towards the printing district, the only place where ink was thicker than blood, and where the word honor was not used to decorate dinner menus. As he crossed a market, he saw a boy selling official newspapers. "Extra, extra! Duke Whitmore announces new reforms for the welfare of the colonies. Progress and order under the crown," the boy cried. Thomas stopped and bought a copy, if only for the masochistic pleasure of reading lies written in impeccable script. "Tell me, lad, what do they pay you to sell these fairy tales? If you want a true story, come find me on Fleet Street. It costs less and teaches you not to trust anyone wearing too much silk." The boy looked at him as though he were mad. Thomas did not blame him. At that moment, with his trunk on his shoulder and anger boiling in his veins, he very much resembled a prophet of doom. He made his way towards Constantina's print shop. She was the one variable James had yet to account for. The Duke believed Thomas to be a solitary man, a lost soldier in search of a cause. He had not yet understood that Thomas had found something far more dangerous than a cause. He had found an accomplice who was not afraid of the dark. As he walked, he passed the carriage of a nobleman he knew well, Lord Harrington. Seeing him, Harrington hastily drew the curtains, vanishing into the velvet gloom. "Oh, don't worry, Harrington," Thomas called, waving his trunk. "It's not contagious, at least until you decide to read something that isn't a dancing invitation." Irony was the only weapon he had left to keep the nausea at bay. James wanted oblivion? Thomas would give him the loudest noise London had ever heard. If the noble world closed its doors to him, he would simply tear down the walls. Reaching Constantina's door, Thomas paused to catch his breath. He looked at his hands, black, permanently stained by lead and smoke. He smiled. Those hands were not meant to clasp the gloved hands of dukes, but to make their paper thrones tremble. He knocked with the measured rhythm of a man who does not ask permission, but announces his arrival. The battle was no longer a hypothesis. It was the only reality left in that city of fog and lies, and he was ready to carry it through to the end, one cutting remark at a time. Judge Sir Edmund Fairborn did not receive Thomas in the lavender-scented drawing room of the family residence in Mayfair, where for years they had discussed Horace and botany over a bottle of vintage port. He received him in his official study at Westminster, a sanctuary of mahogany and leather that smelled of beeswax, old paper, and irrevocable decisions that determined the fate of thousands with the mere stroke of a pen. It was a place where Edmund ceased to be a man and became a cog, the custodian of imperial silence. Edmund did not rise when Thomas entered. He remained seated behind his desk, a bastion of black oak laden with files tied in red ribbons, like open wounds upon a body of paper. The dim London light, filtered through windows that seemed not to have been opened since a previous century, carved deep lines into his face, making him appear like a statue worn down by regret. "Close the door, Thomas, and do try not to leave too much mud on the carpet. It is an original Axminster, and I fear your mere presence is already quite difficult for this house to clean," Edmund began. His voice was a cello string drawn to the brink of snapping, stripped of the warm residence Thomas had once come to cherish. Thomas did not apologize. He sat on a stiff leather chair, feeling the damp of his coat seep into the refined upholstery with almost perverse satisfaction. "Honesty is a luxury that allows you to concern yourself with carpets, Sir Edmund," Thomas replied, using the formal address like a scalpel to maintain distance. "I, of late, have been more concerned with the quality of the air. Did you know that in your official dispatches, the smell of corpses in the colonies is described as strategic necessity? It is a fascinating euphemism, almost poetic, were it not that I had to step over those corpses to return home and ask you how Eleanor fares." Edmund slammed his palm upon the desk. A silver inkwell trembled, spilling a drop of black ink onto the flawless wood. "Enough of this tavern tone. You have set fire to your own house, Thomas. I treated you as a son. I gave you access to my library, to my heart, and you have taken all of it to feed some second-rate furnace in Fleet Street. Did you truly expect the flames to spare Eleanor? Do you imagine she does not feel the weight of your madness every time she enters a drawing room? Eleanor is intelligent enough to understand that this house was already full of ghosts, Sir Edmund. I merely turned on the light. If the sight of dust frightens you, perhaps you ought to stop viewing the world through your corrective lenses and try using your eyes. But I understand. Moral myopia is an occupational disease among judges of the crown. Edmund rose, suddenly appearing much older. You are ungrateful. To use truth as a shield for your anger. James, the Duke of Whitmore, came to me this morning. He was not seeking legal counsel. He wanted your military file. He wished to know whether you were a madman to be confined in an asylum or a traitor to be hanged from a hook. I told him you are merely a man of honor who has lost his bearings. I humbled myself for you. I staked my own reputation. You humbled yourself to protect your position, not me, Thomas replied with a bitter smile. What did you tell him when you read of my discharge? Did you explain that it was not madness, but nausea? Nausea at the orders you signed in this scented study? Well, I tried to convince myself we were bringing civilization to people who only wished to be left alone. Those orders keep this country standing, Edmund shouted, his voice echoing against the shelves heavy with law. They keep the pound strong and peace in the streets of London. You play the prophet with the money of a widow printing scandal sheets, yet you have no notion of the weight of a nation. You are merely a second son in search of purpose, because you have no land to govern and too much vanity to accept a decorative role. Thomas laughed. It was a dry, joyless sound that rang among the book-lined walls like an insult. Is that what you tell yourself to sleep, Sir Edmund? That I am merely envious of other men's titles? I would sooner plow hell with my fingernails than inherit your peace. It tastes of iron and well-written lies. James has ordered you to stop me, hasn't he? That is why you summoned me. You wish to trade in souls with the man you once called a son. Edmund sank back into his chair, dreamed. For a moment, the judge's armor cracked, revealing the tormented friend beneath. James has authorized me to make you an offer, the last one, Thomas. For the sake of what we once were, for those afternoons spent discussing botany, listen to me. Surrender the original documents, all of them. Give us the names of anyone else in Fleet Street involved in this madness. In return, you will be declared mentally unfit due to war strain. You will be sent to an estate in Cornwall, under supervision, but alive. You will have an income, and perhaps, when matters have settled, Eleanor may come and visit you. Thomas remained silent. He watched the fly buzzing wearily against a window pane, searching for an exit that did not exist. An income in exchange for silence, a gilded exile among the cliffs, counting waves and forgetting the names of the dead, and permission to see Eleanor as a prisoner is granted an hour of air. It is a generous offer, Sir Edmund, almost touching in its cynicism. I imagine James already has the contract prepared, written in very expensive ink. It is life, Thomas. It is the only one left to you. Do not destroy it for a handful of dirty papers. No. It is your idea of life, a cage lined with silk so that the sound of chains cannot be heard. Thomas leaned forward, fixing his mentor with a steady gaze. Tell James I appreciate the thought, but I have discovered that the ink on my fingers is harder to wash away than the stain upon my conscience. If you want the documents, you will have to come and take them from the ruins of the print shop. And as for Eleanor, tell her I love her too much to let her rot in Cornwall with a man who has sold his soul for a little bread and butter and the favor of a duke. Edmund closed his eyes. You are a fool. James will not send the police. He will send oblivion. He will take your name, your credit, the very air from your lungs. You will die in an alley and no one will even know you ever existed. Your pamphlet will be used to wrap fish by Monday morning. Perhaps. But the fish will taste damned honest for once, Thomas replied, rising. He adjusted his coat with care that felt like defiance. Thank you for the tea you did not offer me, Sir Edmund, and thank you for reminding me why I began all this. To see men like you tremble behind such imposing desks is a reward no income in Cornwall could ever match. Thomas walked towards the door with steady steps. Before leaving, he turned one last time, studying the bent figure of the man who had raised him. A piece of advice, Sir Edmund. Change your supplier of furniture wax. This study smells of age and stagnation, and old things, as you, who judge the past, should know, burn very quickly if someone by mistake leaves a candle too close to too much paper. He left without waiting for a reply. As he walked through the corridors of Westminster, he felt a cold, cutting euphoria. The bridge to his past had collapsed completely, reduced to ash by his own words. Before him lay no longer the safety of Fairborn's house, but the glorious filth of the print shop and total risk. For the first time since returning from the war, Thomas no longer felt the weight of the leather satchel. He felt only the beating of his own heart, steady as a press that would not stop for anything in the world. In the Fleet Street print shop, the air was so thick with turpentine vapors and pipe smoke that it felt like breathing molten lead. When Thomas crossed the threshold, he saw James's carriage, the Duke of Whitmore, stationed outside like a crow upon a battlefield. It was an elegance that offended the honest filth of the alley, a monument of lacquer and velvet proclaiming order in a quarter that lived by chaos. Inside, James did not seem out of place at all. He stood beside the great Stanhope press, its cast-iron frame rising like a steel gallows. With studied slowness, the Duke ran his fingers, encased in immaculate white kid gloves, over the inked rollers, making the black stain appear all the more sinful. "A fascinating environment, Madame Lunn, truly," James was saying, his voice like a ribbon of silk drawn across a razor's edge. "There is a certain brutal honesty in the way these machines drown out the sound of thought, a pity about the scent of treason clinging to the walls. It almost overpowers the smell of lead, would you not agree?" Constantina, seated upon the composing bench with her pipe unlit between her lips, did not even rise. "It is merely linseed oil, Your Grace, a fragrance those with overly clean hands tend to mistake for something more lethal. Perhaps you are too accustomed to the rosewater they use at Whitehall to mask the rot of your backroom dealings." James smiled, a gesture that did not touch his eyes, cold and gray as the Thames in November. He turned as he heard Thomas's footsteps. "Ah, Thomas, at last. I was beginning to think you had taken a reward holiday in some provincial jail to avoid this conversation." James looked him over with a mixture of lingering affection and fierce disappointment. "Look at you. You smell of cheap ink and second-rate revolt. The last time we dined together, we were discussing the quality of Bordeaux vineyards, and now you resemble a footman who has stolen his master's coat." Thomas stepped forward, his voice steady despite the weariness in his bones. "Leave her out of this, James. If you are looking for a culprit to hang on a hook for decoration at the Tower of London, you have him before you. There is no need to harass Constantina for your delusions of omnipotence. We both know you came here because you've lost sleep." "My sleep is excellent, I assure you. It is yours that concerns me," the Duke replied, closing the distance with the ease of long familiarity. "You disappoint me, my friend. I had hoped your intelligence would surpass this childish, irritating idealism of yours. You have destroyed your reputation, your name, and Edmund's patience in a single morning. For what? To excite a few dock workers who can't even distinguish a secret dispatch from a shopping list? To make your hand tremble when you sign the next sentence, James. And judging by the way you are caressing that press, I would say my ink has worked far better than any of your threats." James gave a dry, humorless laugh. He reduced the space between them further, lowering his voice to that familiar, companionable tone they once used at the club after a third bottle of port. "I have taken everything from you, Thomas. Your home is a heap of mud. Your credit is dust. And even your old friends cross themselves when they hear your name. I have made you invisible. You are a ghost walking in a city that has already forgotten you." Being a ghost has its advantages, James. Ghosts can pass through the walls of your offices and see what you hide beneath those Axminster carpets Edmund so adores. And what I have seen, well, let us say it is not fit for polite company. The Duke sighed, shaking his head. I offer you one final chance, for the sake of our friendship. For those nights we swore we would change the world, though I meant govern it, and you, it seems, meant burn it. Bring me the original documents tonight at Whitehall, all of them. Give me the names of your informants in the colonies. In interchange, I shall place you on a ship to India or the Americas, alive, with an income sufficient to allow you to collect your precious ferns and forget London ever existed. An exile with flowers as decoration. Most picturesque, I remarked with cutting irony. And if I decide I prefer the damp climates of Fleet Street? James's face hardened. The mask of friendship fell away, revealing the bureaucratic monster that ran the empire. If you do not, Thomas, this lady will lose far more than her press. I shall see every piece of metal in this room melted down into cannonballs. And you will watch Eleanor, poor, loyal Eleanor, marry a man of my choosing. A man who cannot even spell the word ideal, but who knows how to obey an order and keep a wife in silence. Is that what you want for her? A life of quiet suffocation because you wish to play the martyr of paper? Thomas felt fury rise in his throat, a hot, corrosive surge that threatened to break his composure. Drawing room threats, James? Have you grown so indolent that you must use a woman's marriage to fight your battles? I expected better from a man of your caliber. I thought you would use the law, not sentimental blackmail. The law is for chicken thieves, Thomas. For friends who place a knife in my back, I prefer oblivion. And oblivion requires no courts. It only requires that I cease to protect you. James adjusted his cuffs with obsessive care, turning towards the door. You have until midnight. After that, you will no longer be a man. You will be nothing more than a paragraph erased from this country's history. I would rather be an erased paragraph than a page written entirely in your lies, James, Thomas called after him. James paused at the threshold, his dark silhouette framed against the gray light of the street. One last thing, Thomas. I saw your type scattered on the floor. Old, worn, nearly illegible. If you truly wish to change the world, you will need far more than lead. You will need a miracle, and I have never believed in miracles, only in the results of the next election. He left, trailing a scent of cologne that felt like an insult to the chemical fumes of the shop. Thomas stood motionless, his fist clenched around a metal punch. He is a loathsome man, Constantina remarked, finally relighting her pipe with a sharp gesture. But I must admit he has an excellent tailor. A pity we shall have to ruin that fine wool coat when we pour the second dispatch over him. I wonder whether cheap ink leaves permanent stains on silk. Thomas looked at her, struck by her glacial composure. He has just threatened to raise your life, and you are thinking about the Duke's laundry? Thomas, my dear, if I worried about every pompous nobleman who tried to intimidate me to protect his little dirty secrets, I would have stopped printing when my husband was still alive. James is right about one thing. Our type is old, but it is ours, and old lead strikes just as hard as new if you know where to aim. Constantina arose, approaching the press James had defiled with his gloves. Now stop trembling with rage. Anger ruins the spacing between lines. We have a revolution to edit and very little time. If your friend James wants oblivion, we shall give him such a detailed chronicle of his crimes that even his grandchildren will have to change their surname just to order a coffee without being insulted. Thomas felt determination surge back through his veins like an electric current. James had made a fatal mistake. He tried to strike him on the plane of social dignity, forgetting that a man who has seen the horrors of the colonies no longer fears ending in the mud. You're right, Thomas said, taking up the roller. Let us prepare the second act. If James wishes to play cat and mouse, let us make him understand that the mouse has just found a store of gunpowder. That's more like it, soldier. Less martyr, more incendiary. Now move. The type will not set itself, and the world is waiting for a reason to stop believing that perfumed dandy. Silence returned to the print shop, but it was a different silence, no longer the void left by the Duke, but the stillness that precedes the first cannon shot. Thomas began to set the letters, one by one, feeling the cold metal answer to his touch. Each letter was a promise, each word a necessary betrayal. James wanted oblivion, he would have the immortality of infamy. James left the print shop with the lethal grace of a predator that had just marked its territory, leaving behind a silence that reeked of threat and expensive cologne. But that void lasted no longer than it took Costantina to reload her short pipe. The Duke of Whitmore was not a man to leave work unfinished. If the diplomacy of the velvet glove failed, James was a master at arming another man's iron fist. The crash of shattering glass was the signal. It was not a noble sound. It was the vulgar roar of a stone smashing through the window, bringing with it the filthy fog and stench of Fleet Street. "Late," Costantina remarked, without moving from the composing bench. "I had hoped your Duke friend employed more punctual assassins. Punctuality is the only virtue I grant to murderers, and it is a quality in short supply in this kingdom." A dozen men burst into the shop, slipping through the breach like black rats. They were no soldiers, but the ghosts hired from the underbelly, faces scarred by pox and eyes filled with the blind malice of men paid not to think. They carried iron bars and carpenter's mallets. "Thomas, if you intended to organize a celebration for your return, you might have told me," Costantina said, gripping the heavy iron lever of the Stanhope press with a steady hand. "I would have prepared a redder ink, but I see your guests have brought their own decorations." Thomas did not reply. His body, trained in the trenches to recognize the rhythm of violence, reacted on instinct. He seized a heavy metal tray filled with freshly cast type. "Do try not to stain the floor with your blood, gentlemen," Thomas called to the first attacker advancing. "Mrs. Lunn has only just finished complaining about the dust. It would be a shame to spoil her mood with your mediocre brains." The first attacker swung a chain. Thomas sidestepped and brought the tray of lead down upon the man's temple. The sound rang out like a discordant bell. The man collapsed into the cases of type, spilling thousands of A's and O's that clattered across the floor like a rain of useless coins. "A fatal spelling error, I should say," Costantina remarked, striking a second assailant in the stomach with the press lever, doubling him over. "I did say no unauthorized proofs in this room." The print shop became a theater of the absurd. While the hired thugs tried to smash the presses, Thomas and Costantina fought to protect the only thing that mattered, the written word. Thomas moved like an ink-stained demon, wielding rollers and paint tins as weapons. "You there!" Thomas shouted at a brute raising a mallet over the main gear. "That machine has an internal logic, something you clearly lack. Try striking something that can return the favor." Thomas intercepted him with a sharp kick to the knee and a series of precise blows to the face. This was no duel of honor. It was a filthy brawl, where the end justified every broken bone. "Thomas," Costantina called, tossing him a heavy composing hammer. "Close that chapter. I'm getting a headache." Thomas caught the tool midair and put the last man down with a precision that unsettled him even. The assault ended quickly. The surviving attackers began to retreat into the fog, dragging their wounded through the mud. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Thomas stood in the center of the room, his breath tearing through his lungs, his knuckles bleeding, bright red mixing with the black of ink. "Well," Costantina said, straightening her apron with steel composure, "at least we no longer need to worry about alphabetical order. It is all exquisitely mixed now. I dare say James would appreciate this disorder. It is the only way he can hope to muddy the waters." Thomas did not smile. His eyes were fixed on a corner of the room. He walked over slowly and picked something up from the shattered glass. It was a cream-colored ribbon. It smelled of lavender. It was Eleanor's. But now it was marked with a smear of black ink, a brutal sign of violation. "They left it on purpose," Thomas murmured, his voice cold as a gallows. "James wants me to know he can touch what I love as easily as he breaks glass." Costantina stepped closer, studying the ribbon. "Your Duke friend does have a flair for theater, a rather expensive way of telling you that Eleanor lies within reach of his claws. Very Regency, I must say. A blend of courtesy and barbarity that makes me want to sick." Thomas clenched the ribbon in his fist. "He thinks he can break me. He thinks fear for her will send me crawling back to Whitehall." "And will it?" she asked. "Because if you intend to surrender, say so now. I could save on the cost of repairing the windows." Thomas looked at the press, then at his ink-stained hands. The irony returned, darker now. "No, if I yield now, she will only be the first hostage. We must set the second dispatch, Constantina, tonight. I want every word to be a wound. I want him tomorrow morning to smell the scent of his own end when he opens the paper." Constantina smiled. "I do like your endings, Thomas, but if we survive, you will pay for the windows, and I do not accept payments in honor. I will pay you with James's head on a tray of lead. Will that suffice as a deposit? For now, it will do. Move, we have a nation to scandalize." Thomas slipped the ribbon into his pocket, close to his heart. The game of diplomacy had died among the shattered glass. Now only the war of ink remained, and he was ready to spill every last drop.